Welcome back! This is the third video in our little trilogy about sound in video games. And today we're going to be looking at voices in video games. While I was making videos about all these different breakthroughs in video sound and music, I started wondering what was the first game that went beyond the beeps and boops to actually talk. Now right off the bat I had a guess. As a kid, I spent a ton of time playing Impossible Mission on the Commodore 64.
Another visitor. Stay a while. Stay forever.
I never really understood what the actual goal of this game was, but I enjoyed dodging robots and finding puzzle pieces. And I'll always remember this yell that it made when you fell into a pit. However, this is far from the first game that could speak. Impossible Mission came out in 1984, but the terrifying Sinistar had already been vocally threatening players in arcades since 1983.
I hunger, coward. Beware, I live.
Going back a little further, 1980 was a big year for speaking games. In November, Berserk had robots that would call Intruder Alert and celebrate when the player was defeated.
Destroy the intruder alert, intruder alert.
A month earlier, Crazy Climber yelled "Ouch!" and a few other phrases.
Oh! Oh! Oh no!
But slightly edging them out by a few months was Stratovox, where characters would yell for help and yell "Lucky" when the player scored a hit. Stratovox is usually listed as the first video game with voice output, but I found a few sources pointing out Major League Baseball on the Intellivision being slightly earlier. However, when I checked it out, I was surprised because this game doesn't have voices at all. Honestly, it barely had sound. Eventually, I figured out that people were confusing Major League Baseball, which was also sometimes called just baseball, with World Series Major League Baseball, which was usually shortened to World Series Baseball. World Series Baseball didn't come out until 1983,
Router! Frosted birds.
but it does have voices thanks to the IntelliVoice. This was an expensive add-on for the Intellivision that added speech to some games.
I'm about to show you something new for Intellivision that will revolutionize the way video games are played and compared. First, here's a popular Atari game. Now don't look. And here's new Space Spartans for the IntelliVoice module.
Hello, Commander.
Starbase 1 under attack. The battle is over.
New IntelliVoice. Now that Intellivision talks, you can tell the difference with your eyes closed.
It's a neat bit of technology, but it was a commercial failure. In the end, only 5 games were produced that used it. So the winner looks like Stratovox, but technically there's one earlier contender.
Rain. R-A-I-N. That is correct.
She's teaching her brother with Speak and Spell.
H-E-R. That is right.
The Speak and Spell came out in 1978. This educational toy was designed to help children learn to read and spell. It was able to read words out loud. I feel like it might just barely count as a video game, but we're definitely pushing that definition a little bit. There were earlier talking toys, but we're mostly talking about things like dolls that played a pre-recorded phrase on tape, which isn't really what we're looking for. So then I started thinking about voice chat in games. Now today it's pretty common for online games to give players the ability to speak directly to each other. But when did this start, and which game was first? Now for a lot of people, their first experience having a 12-year-old scream racial slurs in their ear was either through the PlayStation Network in 2001 or Xbox Live in 2002.
There's this communicator thing, so you can trash talk to each other while you're playing games.
But this definitely wasn't the first place you could speak directly to another player. If you Google this, you'll usually get the answer Alien Front Online for the Sega Dreamcast in 2001. It was an online version of an earlier game, Alien Front, and came bundled with the Dreamcast microphone. My understanding is that the voice chat wasn't actually live. Instead, players could record a message up to 5 seconds long, which would then be played for the recipients, leading to a bit of a lag in communication. Reviews of the game note that the compressed audio was low quality, and that the time delay made it pretty useless for tactical communication. But this was still the first game that allowed console gamers to use voice chat. But what about computer players? Personally, my first experience with voice chat was playing Half-Life. The game came out in 1998, but it didn't have voice chat at launch. It was added as part of a patch in 2001. But who was before that? I should mention that before voice chat was built into games, many PC gamers would use various third-party voice-over IP programs to set up their own voice networks of friends. Discord is the most popular today. I feel like a lot of people use it more for setting up like a group chat to share memes, but the original goal in 2015 was to make it easier for gamers to communicate during gameplay. Before Discord, we had Ventrilo, released in 2002. Before that, there was Roger Wilco, released in 1999. And before that was mPlayer in 1996. There were a bunch of other programs that were similar, but these were the most popular. I've heard anecdotal stories of people playing Doom in offices and setting up a conference call on their phones as sort of an improvised voice chat. And we should probably mention that this was also the era of the LAN party. Gamers would simply drag their computers to a single location and yell at each other from across the room. But I wanted to find the first game that had voice chat with no other programs. When I started looking for early PC games that had voice chat, I came across a few articles that said this all started with MechWarrior 2 in 1995. And this was pretty surprising. This is an old DOS game. It's before anyone even had 56K modems. I just had a lot of trouble believing it. So I started looking into it more. No mention of it in the game manual or any reviews. I even found this interview from an old computer show where one of the developers talks about the game, and this never gets mentioned, despite them talking about online play.
Okay, now MechWarrior, you're playing against the computer right now.
Right.
But you actually have an ability on this with two guys to play over a modem, right?
Exactly. You can play head-to-head over a local area network, or you can play modem to modem. And under development right now is an 8-player multiplayer game. So it's a lot of fun.
The 8-player game they mention here was an add-on called NetMech, which came out a few months after the game's release and added some online features. But again, nothing I could find mentioned voice chat. Also, I know it's a bit trite to make this comparison, but I had to laugh at them talking up this expensive gaming computer.
The machine we're running it on here, I want to explain, is really a PC designed for game players. This is a sort of $3,000 dedicated game machine. It's a 133 megahertz Pentium. It's got a 6x CD-ROM drive, a 1.6 gig hard drive. It comes with built-in MPEG, 45-watt speakers, and it comes bundled with 11 great games, including MechWarrior.
Finally, I hopped over to our MechWarriors on Reddit to talk to some people that actually played this game at the time. They quickly pointed out that neither MechWarrior 3 nor 4 had voice chat, so it didn't make much sense for MechWarrior 2 to have it. A few people recalled using mPlayer when it became available, but that it didn't really work very well. So MechWarrior's out. I'm not really sure where this came from, but it does not look like it had voice chat. So if that's not the first game, what is? I believe the correct answer is a game that is pretty forgotten. Surprisingly, it never really came up in my research on this topic. The only reason it's even in this video is that I had a vague memory of reading about it in PC Gamer magazine years and years ago. It actually took me a while to even figure out what the game was called so I could track down some more info on it. The game I'm talking about is Fireteam. Fireteam came out in 1998. It was sort of an isometric multiplayer real-time strategy game where each player controlled one character. I think you could almost call it like a stripped-down MOBA, like if League of Legends or Dota only had 3 characters, no item shop, and no skill progression. Voice chat was Fireteam's big selling point. The game was shipped with a headset, since this wasn't a thing you'd assume a gamer would own at the time. Previews of the game focused on the voice chat feature and the new cutting-edge technology the developers were using to make it all work. The game got decent reviews, mostly in the 7 or 8 out of 10 range, but with a few extra low scores. Most reviews found the actual gameplay to be pretty mediocre. There's a lot of complaints about lag and trouble finding a game with a small player base, but many reviews seem to think the novelty of the voice chat made up for it. This is part of what makes me more confident that this may be the earliest game with voice chat. The reviews all treat this as a brand new thing. None of them say it has voice communication like that other game. And every review I read seemed to be acting like this was the first game to have done this. The game itself was a commercial failure, selling only about 1,500 copies, which was a shame. The game had a lot of community features like ranked matchmaking and friends lists that are common today, but were still pretty rare at the time. Looking at previews before the launch, it looked like they had a lot of big plans. The game was supposed to be easily moddable so that they could quickly make new game types and scenarios. There was talk of partnering with movie studios to make games based on upcoming movies, and even quickly making levels based on current events. although maybe it's for the best that they never really started doing that. It looks like the developer Multitude got out of game development and began focusing on their voice chat technology instead. The last thing I want to point out is how almost every review of this game mentioned how sometimes you end up in a game listening to a bunch of annoying jerks, so I guess this was a problem with voice chat right from the very beginning. For our last topic, I want to talk about the history of voice recognition, when the game itself understands what you're saying. It's not a super common function in games, even today, but recent developments in AI are making it look like it might get way more common soon. At least my YouTube feed is full of people verbally abusing various AI-powered NPCs. When I see this, I can't help thinking of the 2005 game Facade. You play it as someone visiting a couple that they're friends with, the two immediately start bickering and dragging the player into their disagreements. Using what was at the time cutting-edge tech, Facade let the player type sentences to speak with the couple. It didn't support voice recognition, but I think it's an important step in games understanding what we're saying to them. In 2006, there was Odama on the Nintendo GameCube. It was an odd pinball / real-time strategy game. Players were mostly playing pinball, but they could use a microphone to give orders to their soldiers. Stepping back a few years, the Nintendo DS released in 2004 and came equipped with a microphone that could understand speech. It had Nintendogs and a few other games that could detect what you were saying and respond. Most games didn't use it, and a lot of the games that did had more of like a gimmick where you could blow on the microphone to spin a windmill or something. We mentioned the Dreamcast microphone, which means we need to talk about Seaman, the famously odd Dreamcast game. Players raise a strange fish creature that grows and learns. The Seaman will engage you in conversation, discussing politics, philosophy, and almost anything else. It came out way back in 1999.
Do you think the internet is dangerous? Well, I think it's good that you're exercising a little caution about your internet use. Fire is a wonderful thing, but I wouldn't want to sit on a sofa made out of it.
But a year before that, in 1998, we had Hey You Pikachu on the Nintendo 64.
Now Pikachu responds to your voice. Call him gently out of the forest.
It was also sort of a virtual pet type game where the player took care of a Pikachu. An interesting technical constraint is that the speech recognition was calibrated to the pitch of a child's voice, so it won't work so well for an adult man trying to replay it today. A few years earlier, in 1995, there was the Star Trek Omnipedia. Not really a game, it was sort of an encyclopedia of Star Trek information about the movies and the TV shows. Something that made more sense when most people weren't really on the internet yet. It had an interface designed to mimic the computers on the show, which you could navigate with your voice. Computer, look up Captain Kirk. It looks like it was pretty clunky. It also required the user to do a lengthy calibration, where it would learn their voice pattern by having them recite certain words and phrases over and over again. The same year, there was also Command, Aces of the Deep, an update to the 1994 submarine game, Aces of the Deep. This expansion updated some graphics and allowed you to use your voice to issue orders. The game itself was well received, but reviews tend to note that the voice implementation was pretty unreliable, and that you probably wouldn't want to play the whole game that way. Past this point, it starts to get a little fuzzy. The Famicom had microphones built into the controllers that could detect volume and sometimes rhythm, but not actual speech. Again, they were mostly unused. The most famous example is how the manual for the first Zelda states that Pols Voice, a rabbit-like enemy with big ears, hated loud noises. In the Japanese version, players could yell into their controllers to defeat them. The microphones weren't included with the NES, so the English version didn't have this ability, but the description still stayed in the manual. So what was the very first game of voice recognition? It is way older than you might think. In 1973, researchers at Carnegie Mellon University created voice chess. Since chess has a constrained series of rules, it only needed to know 31 words. Honestly, these technical documents on how it works are pretty far over my head, but basically it had two systems. The voice recognition system would listen and try to figure out what the player said. A second system would analyze the chessboard and figure out what moves the player could legally make. The program would then compare the voice input's guesses to the list of possible moves to help narrow down and determine what was actually said by the player. I believe this is the first game to use voice recognition. But there is one more thing I want to talk about, because it's just too wacky to leave it out. Radio Rex was a toy made in 1922. It's a little dog in a little doghouse. It had a spring that would push him out of his house when triggered. The triggering mechanism would release the spring when vibrated at 500 Hz, which is supposed to be the frequency of somebody saying Rex. The end result being that you could call Rex and he would pop out of his house in response. Now, from all accounts, they didn't really work. The mechanism would either fail to trigger or trigger early from some other unintentional vibrations. But still, it's a pretty cool idea considering the technology they had to work with. It's the earliest voice-activated toy and possibly the first voice-activated device. And that's it for this video. Was there anything I missed? Do you remember your first time talking to someone else in a game? Is there a question or mystery you'd like me to look into? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.